Soul is the latest movie by Pixar that was supposed to come out in theaters earlier this year, but due to the pandemic, things didn't work out that way. So instead they released it on Disney Plus on Christmas Day, without charging extra Mulan. But in all seriousness, this is actually probably one of the best and riskiest films Pixar has ever made. The movie follows the story of Joe, a music teacher slash failed jazz musician played by Jamie Foxx, who is deeply unsatisfied with his life. He gets a call out of nowhere from one of his former students and offers him the opportunity he's been waiting his whole life for, playing for one of the biggest names in jazz, Dorothea Williams. Naturally, he nails the audition, gets the job, and dies immediately. Oof. Understandably pissed off about dying right when shit was getting good, he breaks out of the non-religious purgatory, I guess, and he accidents his way into the Great Before, a place where new souls go before they're born. The angels mistake him for a mentor, i.e. people who help problem spirits find their way to Earth, and they pair him up with Soul 22, a snarky, disillusioned soul played by Tina Fey, who has absolutely no interest in living, by the way.
I'm comfortable up here. I have my routine. I float in mist. I do my Sudoku puzzles, and then once a week they make me come to one of these youth seminars.
They decide to team up to send Joe to Earth in her place, so that he can continue living and she can continue not living. And that's probably as far as I can go without spoilers. So I'll save that talk for later in the video, but I'll just start off by summarizing my spoiler-free thoughts. Don't worry, I'll warn you before we get to the spoiler talk. Okay, so this is probably one of Pixar's heaviest films, topic-wise that is. I mean, they're already no strangers to addressing serious topics in a way that young audiences can easily engage with. But in Soul, they are not pulling any punches. I mean, the main character literally dies before the title card even shows up. And it just kind of ramps up from there. And by the end, the film is actively inviting you to reevaluate your own life in the same way Joe does, and to ask yourself the very same existential questions that really don't get talked enough about in any media, let alone a kids movie. And that's what really sets Soul apart from Pixar's other works. This movie really was made for an adult audience first. I definitely wouldn't say it's not for kids, but it also isn't made for kids. What I mean is that with films like Coco and Inside Out, they were absolutely made with the intention of addressing their chosen topics to kids. They had a message they wanted to convey, and they had a young target audience in mind. So they catered their stories specifically for that audience. And once they had that, because it's a Pixar movie, they added in plenty of jokes and references to appeal to adults. That way, anyone could sit down and still be entertained. With Soul, I feel like they did the exact opposite. I think this movie was made explicitly for an adult audience. I mean, the protagonist isn't a kid, he's in his 40s. He has adult problems. And the themes of this movie itself, like why am I living and what is my purpose, it's the kind of shit that's in the back of every adult's mind, and probably teenagers and adolescents too. But maybe not like little kids. But of course they tweaked a few elements to keep the younger audiences entertained. So yeah, instead of making a kids film then tweaking it for adults, they made a film for adults first, and they made it more accessible to kids after. Which isn't a bad thing. In fact, I really respect it for that. It's just a different way of doing it this time. Of course, I don't think these themes are completely inaccessible to kids. I mean, there are plenty of quite popular children's media out there that deal with some very serious topics. So there's clearly a market. And I think there's still plenty here for kids to enjoy. I mean, 22's cynical humor will almost certainly resonate with a lot of young people.
You can't crush a soul here. That's what life on Earth is for.
But maybe for like little kids, then this movie is more like a sleeper pick. You know, one of those movies where you'll watch it now and be entertained, but then come back to it years later with a whole new appreciation for it. Which I think just gives the film longevity, and that's good because it means it's just going to get even more popular over time. And I have to take a moment to talk about the animation, which I have mixed feelings about. Not because it's bad, in fact it's probably the best Pixar has ever been. The lighting and backgrounds of New York are so beautiful and realistic that sometimes it can be easily mistaken for an actual photograph. It's a huge step up. And the movement is so fluid, I don't think I've ever seen animated characters behave this much like real humans before. They just feel so real, and that's kind of the problem. What I mean is that they still have that classic Pixar art style, which I love, but next to the backdrop of this hyper-realistic setting, and the fact that these are supposed to be actual humans, not just sentient cars or slightly anthropomorphic animals, it means that this movie would occasionally give off some deep Uncanny Valley vibes for me. Thankfully, about half the movie was spent in the spirit plane, meaning that these moments were only occasional and didn't really dampen my enjoyment. However, I really hope that this is something Pixar keeps in mind, especially as the animation quality only gets better. Okay, now I want to talk a bit about the ending. So this is your official warning. If you want to avoid spoilers, skip to this timestamp. I'll give you a second to skip ahead. Are we good? You ready? Fantastic. Okay, so I have to say I love the way they handled Joe's arc. I mean, we've seen this kind of build up before, where the hero either achieves their dream and there's this big climactic moment and everything's all happily ever after, or they have this big realization that it wasn't what they really wanted, and they give that up for something else, and that's where they get their happy ending.
This grumpy old race car I know once told me something.
It's just an empty car.
But no, in this film, he got exactly what he wanted, and he still feels unsatisfied. And it's not like he suddenly had a change of heart about being a jazz musician. No, this movie takes the time to show you that this is his moment. This is what his whole life has been leading up to. But when that's finished, there's just this moment of, well, now what? This was supposed to be the moment where everything changed, but he's still just living.
I heard this story about a fish. He swims up to this older fish and says, "I'm trying to find this thing they call the ocean." "The ocean?" says the older fish. "That's what you're in right now." "This?" says the young fish. "This is water. What I want is the ocean."
As someone who openly identifies as an existential nihilist, I so wish this movie was around when I was a kid. There's just this prevailing attitude in all media, not just kids, that all you need to do is achieve your lifelong dream, and that's it. Everything's sorted. The end. You know, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life and all that.
If you know what you're passionate about, if you know what you're good at, and you invest in that. People say follow your passions, I say forget that. Invest in your passion.
But that's not how life works. There's no one universal checkbox you need to fill in order to win life. Life is messy, and finding your own meaning in it is a continuous process, and it's different for everyone. Shit like, why am I living? How do I become satisfied with my life? What is my purpose? These are questions that everyone is going to need to come to terms with eventually, and no one is going to answer them for you. What this movie does is have an honest conversation with you about these questions, and more importantly, it does not straight up give you the answers. It wants you to engage and have an honest conversation with yourself, and I love it for that. And I really enjoyed the ending. And this next part is like super spoilery, but there is a discussion going on right now about whether or not Joe should have died at the end. The argument being that this was a story about a guy learning that his life was not meaningless, that he did make a difference, and that all the little things he missed were the things that made his life worth living. But that wasn't my interpretation. How I saw it was that this was the story of a man learning how to live, that he was so hyper-focused that he never saw the forest for the trees, and it's about him learning what he should have been focusing on the whole time. And once he learned that, he can now go back and do it right this time. This movie does a beautiful job of communicating the balance between passion and obsession, without ever just saying passion is bad will make you miserable. Now, this film never portrays Joe's love of jazz as a bad thing. Like, I don't think anyone's going to accuse this movie of any anti-jazz agenda, but it is pretty explicit with his messaging of what happens when you allow that passion to be your only purpose in life, and the self-destructiveness that comes with that. Passion is a good thing, but when it becomes a detriment to every other part of your life, you're going to have problems. And in a society that puts so much value on our achievement and productivity, this is a good message for people to be hearing. Okay, end of spoiler talk, time to wrap this up. Now, if you ask me if I'd recommend this movie, then yes. Unequivocally yes. This is probably in my top 5 favorite Pixar films of all time. The animation is just beautiful, the characters all have great chemistry, and the dialogue just feels really organic. And I love the direction of the story and the themes it plays with. And there really needs to be more film and TV shows that treats its younger audiences with this level of maturity. But like I said, some of these themes may go over the heads of like little kids. But to me that just means they're going to appreciate it more as they revisit this movie when they're older, which is only a good thing. And it looks like a lot of moviegoers agree. I mean, there were definitely a few people making the argument that it might not necessarily be for their young kids, but they seem to be in the minority, with overall reception seeming to be universally positive. But what do you think? Do you like this more mature direction Pixar seems to be taking? And was I the only one in that uncanny valley? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video. Hopefully. Man, I've really been neglecting this channel lately.